Welcome to Newshour. Iran's parliament has sacked the country's finance minister after impeaching him over rapidly rising inflation and a dramatically devalued currency. Well, economy and finance minister Abdolnasser Hemmati lost a vote of confidence with 182 of 273 parliamentarians backing his removal. And this comes as Iran's Vice President for Strategic Affairs, Mohammad Javad Zarif, also resigned. So what's happening inside the Iranian corridors of power? And what will be the new approach to dealing with the unrelenting pressure of US sanctions? Well, let's go to Tehran now and speak to the political commentator and analyst, Mr. Touraj Sharalilo. Touraj, thank you very much for joining us. Touraj, a very clear, if not totally unanimous, vote of no confidence in Mr. Hemmati then. Currency exchanges in Tehran have reportedly been trading at 930,000 rials for every US dollar. Inflation still soaring. Was this decision then inevitable?
Not very cold in Tehran, but political temperature is very high. As you said, these two events came one after the other, very shortly. Yesterday, finance minister was impeached and sacked, and late last night, Mr. Zarif resigned. What I can read between the lines is that there are some superficial factors and some underlying factors behind Mr. Hemmati's impeachment. Two factors you mentioned. The soaring prices here, as well as inflation, and also Iranian currency losing about 50% of its value against US dollar from like 60,000 rials, 600,000 rials 6 months ago when President Pezeshkian came to office to like 900,000 rials, which means like 50%. But it appears that this was one of the main factors behind his impeachment. During his short-term office, like 6-7 months, he agreed with the transfer of Iran's major maker, Iran Khodro, to private sector. And this transfer had its own opponents, very, I should say, powerful opponents who did not agree with that. At the same time, he was supporting delisting Iran from FATF, or let's say UN conventions on anti-laundering, and he was supporting this. And 2 months back, on his X account, he said that Iranian supreme leader has agreed with reconsidering or reviewing Iran joining the UN conventions, UN protocols, and so that Iran will be delisted from the blacklist. These two, or a number of macro policies, or that he had in mind, had its own enemies, or let's say opponents in the conservative camp. Mr. Hemmati called himself a reformist, a moderate person, an independent politician, but his policies were not welcomed by the conservative camp, which is now holding the majority in the Iranian parliament or Majlis, and that was why some 90 MPs signed for his impeachment, and finally he was impeached and ousted. So I should say that the economic factors were the main elements behind his impeachment, but there were also some macroeconomic factors like the ones that I mentioned behind his impeachment.
Touraj, these two men have now gone. If the trajectory that was set by them is not seen as correct, then what new strategy will their replacements conceive to weather this storm of US sanctions?
I don't see any short-term direct link with their departure and U.S. sanctions or U.S. policies. This is a deep-rooted political, or I should say, power structure polity in Iran that is working against such figures. But at the same time, I think that U.S. sanctions have a role in this, but we shouldn't give much credit to that. As to U.S. sanctions, as Mr. Trump has said, he wants to bring down to zero Iran's oil export from the current 2 million barrels a day, 2.5 million barrels a day, unofficial figures. But again, we see that there are some signs that Mr. Trump wants to reach a deal with Iran, and not Iran specific, I mean generally speaking. Just we need to have a look at what he did to his first circle of apostles, his close aides. He almost ousted Mr. John Bolton out of his close circle, as also Mr. Mike Pompeo. People that are usually known to or famed to be neocons or neoconservatives. And this shows that he wants to reach to his objectives through pressure, but not necessarily through military confrontation. But again, back to your question, I don't think that their departure, Mr. Zarif and Mr. Hemmeti's ouster or his resignation, I don't see any direct link with U.S. pressures or U.S. links, but with the polity here that is very sensitive with people who have a pro-Western approach or want to establish negotiations with the United States.
Touraj, let's look at Mr. Zarif now. I mean, he was known as a prominent figure advocating for talks with the West. To what extent should his departure be seen as more of this pushback from more conservative opponents?
The latest news is that, as government spokeswoman said a few minutes ago, that President Pezeshkian has not so far agreed with his resignation and with his departure. But I don't think that will change a lot because, again, Mr. Zarif will remain under a lot of pressure. He had a key role in victory of President Pezeshkian during his presidential campaign 7-8 months back. And again, when he was elected, Mr. Zarif was assigned as his right man as the director of Center for Strategic Studies, and also was promoted to this position of vice for strategic affairs. So the conservative camp in Iran was, in fact, worried that Mr. Zarif, although he is not a foreign minister, no longer a foreign minister, but he is making more influence on the presidential or on the executive branch, and this was something that annoyed him a lot. And apparently, again, there was the talk that they are taking revenge of him because he made Mr. Pezeshkian the victorious side in the elections last year. But once more, I think there are some qualities, some features in Mr. Zarif that will make him a target of the rightist camp or conservative camp, as long as he is in the Iranian, playing in the Iranian politics or is trying to have a role in that. Back in 1980s, he was one of the chief negotiators or persons who were drafting the UN resolution ending the Iran-Iraq war. So he has showed this daftness and skillfulness of working in international situations, working in international organizations. And now it is everybody can remember that he had a very influential role. He was the chief negotiator with the world powers in 2015, which resulted in the signature of the JCPOA, or the nuclear agreement, with five world powers. I think these characteristics of Mr. Zarif, and the fact that he was supporting negotiations with the United States, but again backed off after President said that I will follow the lines or the guidelines of the leader, and we will not negotiate with the United States. These characteristics that the conservative camp regards him as a pro-Western character or politician will keep him as a target. So whether he has any position in the government or not, Mr. Zarif will remain so. And apparently, again, there was, or there is still, the excuse that because his family have U.S. citizenship, his son was born in the United States when he was studying there, and there is this legislation that people or politicians holding high-ranking positions, their relatives or their family members shouldn't have let's say, dual nationality. And this apparently brought him again to the focus as a target. But again, as I said, this is what we see superficially. And at the very bottom of these issues are the fact that Mr. Zarif is more interested or thinking and believing in talks with the world, with the West, and also that he worked very hard, and in fact he is very successful in making the conservative camp losing the presidential elections.
Thank you very much, Touraj. Now, yesterday, we also heard from Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who thanked US President Donald Trump for sending munitions that had been put on hold by the previous US administration. Mr. Netanyahu said this delivery would help him finish the job against what he called Iran's terror axis. Well, let's now speak to Dr. Nir Boms, who is a research fellow at Tel Aviv University. Dr. Boms joins us from the US. Dr. Boms, thank you very much for joining us. Really keen to get your perspective on this. How do you think these resignations in Tehran might impact the dynamic between the US, Israel, and Iran?
Well, the dynamics in Iran that we just described reflect objective difficulties for Iranians' economy. I don't think it's just about the ability of a particular minister, advisor, or a former head of Iran's bank, as it was the case for the minister that was just impeached. It had a lot to do with the sanctions, and perhaps with the need to put some in blame for some objective reality that has to do with broader policy. And it means that the administration, the government of Pezeshkian is not necessarily doing well. And that lack of stability may contribute to the next phase as the US attempts to either move toward another attempt to create a deal or pressure when it comes more directly to the nuclear file, because Iran, irrespective of its economy and the suffering of its people, seems to be spending all of its resources in this direction.
And can I ask, do you think this turning away from dialogue, this seeming rejection of dialogue with the West, with Israel and others, do you think that's a mistake? Would you like to see the ground laid for the potential for dialogue in the near future?
Look, I think from an Israeli perspective, what we would like to see is Iran playing a different role than the one it played. We have a nuclear file, which is complicated on its own, and it's complicated because of Iran's behavior. What we have seen in the past 17 months is the results of Iran's activities in creating proxies and in creating a ring of fire that, in the case of Israel, we then had to tackle and face almost each one of these 7 different fronts that were all Iran related. I will remind you that in all the wars that we've had in the Middle East, including from the War of Independence that we had 6 different fronts, these were fronts where Israel had been fighting the Arabs. In the past few decades, Israel has not been fighting the Arabs. We have actually been normalizing and creating peace agreements. And if now we had a front of the war, it really had to do with one country that created them, and that's Iran. If the United States now, with a new approach, attempts to say to Iran, well, you need to change course. Changing course has to do with the nuclear file and has to do with all the other files of not just weapons, but also the approach of creating terrorism, havoc, proxies. And I think for the Iranian people who are suffering and would like to put food on the tables, and they're asking, why do we need to fight in Gaza? Why do we need to support a proxy in Lebanon that destabilizes Lebanon? We would like to have our own country first. We would like to make Iran great again.
Make Iran great again. And can I just ask for your assessment of the current situation in the US with the US foreign policy, President Trump? Are you confident? Are you happy about what you've seen from that administration?
I don't think that it's easy to see some of what we're seeing when it comes to Ukraine, when it comes to a very unclear line, and I think when I speak to many of my colleagues in the US, where I'm now, I see a lot of concern. I don't think that in Israel we are blind for some of these concerns, but we have our own agendas, Iran being one of them, and I think here we see a lot of alignment between the way the United States looks at the threat and between when we look at the threat. I think we are other issues of concern between 2 governments, being very friendly governments as well. It's okay to have disagreements, and I think we need to navigate this. We need to still get used to the conduct of this administration, to the language of this administration, and the way they would like to conduct themselves. I think it's early to comment of how all of this will unfold. There has been certainly a lot of noise. A lot that was done in a very short amount of time. Some of this is now being refuted also in the United States. And I think some of it will hopefully bring itself into a balance. But in terms of the broader policy line, I think at least this administration stands firmly when it comes to the issue of Iran and an attempt to move this country into a different code of conduct, into a different code of behavior. And this is something that most of us in Israel very much appreciate, and we hope that this will actually help bring about the needed change.
Dr. Boms, very, very interesting to speak to you. Thank you very much for joining us. Dr. Boms from Tel Aviv University, joining us there from the United States. Thanks very much. Well, that is all we have time for on this edition of NewsHour. Please do stay with us for more news and analysis. And from all of us here in Baku, thank you for watching.